A brief description of the midterm essay question, which, by way of reminder, you will be writing an essay for your final examination using this prompt, which will count both for the midterm essay as well as the final essay. So the question is, assume that you're responsible for the aesthetic. That is, you are producing in some way, directing, designing, responsible for the overall creative conception, that is the aesthetic or the matrix, the director's matrix of a production. For one of the plays that we read this semester, you're probably going to want to go with one of the early ones. I would choose a play with some overt, explicit theatricality, but one that's not terribly ambiguous in terms of its analysis. Perhaps In the Blood or The Shape of Things, Wit would be a good option as well. And then using any format from an essay to a bulleted list to an outline like you see in the question, do the following. First, define the word theatricality as we define it in class. I believe that you can answer that part. Next, cite and justify a nominative statement which describes the meaning of the play, which you're going to then theatrically articulate to your audience. So what that's asking for, and this is something that we discussed throughout the semester over and over again, is to cite for me what you see to be the central thematic structure of the play, or the nominative statement. That is, you're going to articulate an active, concise, fully articulated theme that you feel centers the play's message to the audience. So a nominative statement, if you recall, is that statement after which you would that statement that you would insert after saying to the audience, "Hey everyone, listen, I have something really important to tell you, something that's going to change your life, change the way you think about the world, and that thing is," you wouldn't insert there a word like hatred or jealousy. "I have something really important to tell you, something that's going to change your life, change the way you think about the world, and that thing is jealousy." You wouldn't do that. You would have to insert an active statement, like, "I have something to tell you about the world that's going to change the way you think about it, and that thing is jealousy always hurts the person who's jealous as much as the person who they're jealous of." Whatever you think the play is about, it's the central message of the play. Now that nominative statement is going to help to define the kind of theatrical convention that you use. So in terms of the way we define theatricality in class, the embrace of the distance between something, its reality in the world that we live in, and your representation of that thing on stage, which is different. It's not the same. A rock in reality is not the same as a rock in a play, because a rock in a play is not a real rock, it's a representation of a rock. And the audience knows it's a representation, and it's never going to look exactly like a rock in reality, if for no other reason than that it's up on stage. So that distance, that difference between the reality and your representation is for you to interpret. How will you represent objects? How will you represent ideas? How will you create motifs, repetitive, repeated structures, be they visual, audio, be they literary, be they structural, architectural? How will you use the distance between the reality and your representation of reality to add information to the play such that the audience is likely to understand your message, your nominative statement, that thing that follows, "Hey guys, I have something really important to say, and that thing is this." Remember, it's nominative because you're nominating it. You're saying, "This is my idea for the message of this play." It's not the message of the play, it's what you decide the message of the play to be. So if you take a play like The Shape of Things, and you decide that you're going to represent all of the locations in that play using digital projections that are very clearly digital and clearly of the computer age, then you're going to bring to the fore of the play thematically for the audience, you're going to create a play whose thematic message is brought to the fore in a way that gets the audience thinking about computers and the digital age. So that theme is going to have more relief than perhaps some of the other themes, like understanding artistic ontology, understanding artistic criticism, understanding what makes good art, what makes bad art, and its relationship to ethics, ethical ontology, and what makes good actions and bad actions, and empathy, right? All of those subthematic areas will be filtered for you through this central theme, because your nominative statement has to do with the computer age and screen mediation, or the fact that we experience people in the world so often through screens. So when you interpret the world of the play, that is, when you embrace the distance between the thing and the representation of that thing, you'll do so in such a way that adds information to your central theme. So that's the nominative statement. And then you're going to cite 5 thematic categories that support that statement. So if your nominative statement, for example, on the shape of things, has to do with screen mediation, your 5 thematic categories, and these are not well-articulated themes, such as I just explained with your nominative statement. Rather, they're just categories, one-word ideas, right? So, or phrases. So you might say artistic ontology. You might say artistic criticism. You might say beauty and our changing conception of beauty. You might say ethics and the root of ethics. You might say personal identity, right? Those are 5 easy thematic categories from the play, The Shape of Things. And then you're going to talk about how your production will articulate your nominative statement through the use of, you're going to describe 3 different theatrical conventions. So you have to split them up. At least one has to be of your own invention, and at least one has to be one we discussed in class. That is, one that's discussed in the Collaborate that I sent to you. So you watch the Collaborate, you'll see I talk explicitly about the theatrical conventions in the play and how they work. So you'll watch that, and you'll pull out some of those theatrical conventions, and then you'll describe to me how they support your nominative statement, whatever it happens to be. 3 total, probably 2 that are described in the Collaborate, and 1 that you invent yourself. I would represent the symbol of the jacket in such and such a way. Or perhaps you would say, in terms of the way the actors move around the stage, I would have them always keep their legs locked and their arms locked so that they don't bend any of their joints, so that there's something very stick figure about them, which is to kind of get the audience thinking about how the way we deal with each other through screens and through the internet, we aren't real human beings. We're allowed to be less than human. Whatever it is. It's great if it's a stretch. That's great. Whatever it is doesn't matter. Okay? And then you're going to justify the use of your conventions, which describe thematic categories that they're adding information to, and the way that you're embracing the distance to add that information. So that's essentially what we were just doing. You're talking about those themes and how your conventions support those themes. So you might describe how one of the conventions, either one that we discussed in class or one of your own invention, supports one of those 5 thematic categories. But it's more likely that you'll just talk about how they support your nominative statement, which is what I just did, the reference that I made to walking as though you're not human, right? I showed how a theatrical convention, an embrace of the distance, which is people walking around with their legs and arms locked, which is over the top. Sure, as a director, I would never really use that. But to make a point for you here, that theatrical convention, it's not reality. It's embracing the distance so that I'm almost pointing out that this is not reality. These are not people really moving. It's a representation of people moving. Is meant to add information. It's meant to mean something. because Aristotle said we look for meaning, we look for patterns, and so we do. And then you'll show how that meaning adds information to your nominative statement. It shows the inhumanity involved and the lack of empathy involved and the potential for sociopathy or psychopathy involved with the internet age. Yes? Now, finally, you're going to talk about the value of your production according to the standards of Uta Hagen in respect for acting. In other words, how does your production of this play, in our example, it's The Shape of Things, revolt against the status quo? You're going to just bring up a national current news story that your production might make some commentary to serve, either social, political, economic, emotional, spiritual, but some commentary about a hot button news issue, and then you'll explain how you use divergent creative inference in order to do so. That second part is just using terminology we used in class, and all it means is you're going to explain why your play talks about that news story. It's not difficult to do if you've been practicing what we've been practicing in class. That is, using your imagination and your ability to use divergent analysis and divergent creativity in order to make inferences, connect one idea to another idea. So you might pick up any of the unrest that's happened across the country as a result of police brutality. So, for example, all of the stuff that happened in Ferguson. And you could make reference to that because you could talk about how the crowdsourced information that was that you could find on the internet during the so-called riots was completely different than the information that we got on the television, thereby bringing up the internet age and making that connection in that way. You could also just talk about a general lack of empathy and a kind of sociopathy, and in that way you might bring up some of the stuff that's going on in North Africa and in Southeast Asia and the Middle East in general, with not just the fighting in general, but certainly some of the beheadings from ISIS. You could really easily make connections there to a lack of empathy and a kind of sociopathy, etc., etc. Okay? Again, structure it any way you like. Alexis, just do it. But you really do. You need to do this in a way that shows me that you made an effort to go back and watch those collaborates, understand the terminology. You did your absolute best, okay? Do your best. That's all I ask. All right.